I think we could just start. Yeah, we're live.
Oh, we're streaming live on YouTube. Hello, YouTube. This is the 5th episode of Discourse from Discord.
Not according to you all, though. I haven't uploaded all the videos.
Yeah,
Sorry.
5th one in terms of filming. I'm Michael Favada, my frequent conversation partner, Scout Hartley here, and Evan Anderson.
Hello.
The three of us make up The Reason Vegan. We have a podcast over there. But we're here today to discuss the intellectual dark web, which has been getting a bit of a new round of press, I would say, in reaction to a new book by Michael Brooks, Against the Web, who's a socialist lefty type. He has the Michael Brooks Show. He's normally a very snarky and make fun of you kind of guy. And that's normally his relationship. It's very antagonistic and just kind of dunking on people. But he's trying to take a serious look and do hard-hitting criticism of the IDW. He has a conversation with Robert Wright that's worth checking out on this. Robert Wright is another critic of the IDW. And I should first, I guess, define it a little bit. The intellectual dark web is a term coined by Eric Weinstein on Sam Harris's podcast. And it was profiled by the New York Times, by Barry Weiss. It's a loose confederation of maverick, free-thinking people that have in common gripes with the left, the progressive left broadly, that are supposed to stand for free speech in all its forms, and they want to be able to express controversial opinions and discuss them freely and in good faith. They brought into the mainstream concepts like steel manning, which, as opposed to straw manning, is arguing against the best possible version of your opponent's arguments. And I've had a long-standing relationship with Sam Harris in particular, but there are other people. Jordan Peterson is another superstar. Ben Shapiro might be on the periphery. Dave Rubin might be on the periphery. And I am sure, like a lot of people, have mixed feelings about all these different people. But I've said my piece. I'll give it to you, Evan, to react to that.
Yeah, so my first criticism or question, I guess, I don't remember if I listened to that podcast where the term was coined, but of course, who was it, Eric Weinstein? Of course he came up with the term intellectual dark web, but where it doesn't really make much sense to me. So I don't know if he explained it, but so the dark web in reality is sort of a, I guess, in vague terms, it's defined by the parts of the internet that are not indexed by search engines. But more, I guess, in a more practical sense, it's websites where you have to have a special browser called the Tor browser. And you have to go to certain websites that end with .onion, or at least that used to be the case. I think it still is the case. But all the websites on the dark web are .onion, and the way it works is it's completely anonymized. If you are browsing on Tor, you know basically your connection is basically laundered through other servers, and then it exits onto the web, I guess you could say, from someone else's server. So there's kind of like a tunnel, where your connection goes through, and the point is to establish almost complete anonymity. So you can browse and it's not traceable. If you've heard of the Silk Road, that was an online drug marketplace that I think doesn't exist anymore because they got busted. But it was a way to buy drugs online and somewhat safely, from what I've heard, and get them mailed to you. So the dark web refers to an anonymous way to browse the internet, or kind of the secret internet, if you will. So what does that have to do with these people who are going on podcasts and publicly expressing their views? What is dark webby about that?
This is a great Weinsteinism, and he has a lot of these different things. When I first heard him speak, I was confused and a little bit off put, because he has these kind of clunky, kind of nerdy expressions that he uses, but they're coining ideas for actually what are new things. So he has this idea that mainstream institutions of various sorts, including academia, the scientific world, the mainstream media, um, you know, any kind of big, powerful institution, they have this logic that he calls the gated institution narrative, or GIN, just like the IDW, where things are kept, the truth is kept from the public in some sense. There are things that we can know that you can't, and we are going to put out a list of acceptable kind of talking points, or we're going to mold the terms of discussion in such a way, and keep truth to ourselves so that we can use it as a weapon. Or not necessarily as a weapon, just because we think these ideas, maybe we think the truth is dangerous. Maybe we set the narrative. And the idea is that this group of renegade thinkers is flying under that. So Sam Harris made his fame criticizing religion, Islam in particular. Criticism of the doctrine of Islam is outside the boundaries of acceptable conversation, not just in polite society, but also in media. The idea that there's anything inherently violent about that religion, the idea that it's anything other than a religion of peace, which is something that I think maybe Bush started saying, but maybe it was Obama too. But that's mainstream, that's sort of sacred. So to flout that is to fly under the radar. I agree that you don't want to be compare yourself to kind of a den of criminality the way much of the dark web is considered. But I think that's the metaphor. I don't know. Does that work?
I think so. So it's like, it's this way of, I guess, expressing ideas without, well, I mean, just expressing them at all. An avenue basically for expressing these ideas that are rejected by institutions, supposedly illegitimately rejected by institutions, and a way to, I guess, avoid, not necessarily a way, but to, because people have, lost their jobs, and been kicked out of their field or whatever because of things that they express that are to various degrees true. And so it sounds like the IDW is about expressing ideas outside of that paradigm where you can lose your job for saying the wrong thing according to the institution.
Yes. And it's particularly true. It's not just institutions that are doing silencing. It's also Twitter, which is a very progressive place generally. And there's a lot of, it kind of incentivizes outrage. And there's a lot of talk about how ideas are violence in some way. Certain speech is a kind of violence. And, ideas are too dangerous to be heard, deplatforming of speakers. There's this whole range of complaints that come from this group of thinkers who are, the claim is that they're politically diverse, and I think that's mostly true. I mean, Ben Shapiro is the furthest right, although I don't know if he's a fully fledged card-carrying member of the IDW. Sam Harris is mostly a normal California social liberal centrist type of person. You could go down the gun range, gun control, abortion, progressive taxation, all that stuff. He checks all those boxes. Mm-hmm. But he's interested in touching a lot of taboos that, at least on the Twitter sphere, are completely off topic.
But they're all on Twitter. So
all these ideas are on Twitter, you're saying?
Yeah.
All these thinkers.
Well, I think you were saying they're avoiding the social media mob or whatever, yes. But they're all, at the end of the day, the problem with the social media mob is that it either crushes people who, you know, don't have any power at all, justly or unjust. I guess it would always be unjustly. Um,
Well,
it, I'm not saying it always is, but I guess
But the cases we care about are the cases where it happens unjustly.
right.
Yeah.
But I guess at the end of the day, isn't the biggest issue that the Twitter mob would cost you your career or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, and this is where I don't know if the argument breaks down a little bit. There, it's more dangerous, and you have to be more brave to express the sorts of opinions that Sam or Eric expresses, because you're swimming against the tide. Like the amount of hate that a kind of any kind of right-leaning figure, or you know, a James Damore is facing, or James Damore was the author of the Google memo, or the other canonical case in this is Justine Sacco, who made it basically a bad joke that she thought of as satire in the realm of South Park, but she was actually a social media communications director or something, of all things. She was going to Africa and she said, "Hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." And that was supposed to be like a snarky little joke that was meant in good fun to kind of satirize her own privilege as a white person, her own inoculation from having to think about such things. And she was, she lost her job and was fired. And so there's this idea that speech is being chilled from, because the mob doesn't have to carry around the big stick and use it all the time. It's just the fact that there are a few people that are expressing their views. Maybe the better example is Damore for this kind of thing, who wrote, I think it was Weinstein who described it as like a B+ paper on the biological differences in personality between men and women, but was fired from Google and endlessly the subject of outrage for it.
so like there's like a lot to unpack with all of this, but I just want to so about this notion of like the GIN, the gated institutions narrative, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
So and let me just make the disclaimer that like I am not someone who like is familiar with the intellectual dark web. I don't I get my information from a very small subset, and then like I have fun with like Blaze TV, like other things, but like you
Somewhat
know
ironically.
I don't, yeah, I totally ironically, I'm a very progressive person, but in any case, so like I hear all these caricatures about like liberalism and progressivism and people who are social justice minded, and again, I work in a very, maybe what you might say is like a subset of the population as well. But the people who I work with, my colleagues, are in my consulting and my advocacy work, are generally like progressive, liberal, very progressive in some cases. I don't really hear like the kind, and I understand that it does happen. I just don't see it. I think that like I think that there's this weird thing that the internet does, and this is just me like shooting from the hip or hypothesizing, but the internet does this weird thing where it like amplifies the realness of feelings in society. I think it breathes more life into extremism than there really is life in extremism, and I think it confuses the heck out of people. Like I just don't see like these caricatures of liberalism in my life. Just like I don't see caricatures of veganism or anything. I just think that like the internet takes these archetypes and then they become shareable, and there's also like this culture around sharing and being followed and everything else. I think Twitter is I think Twitter is a problem because Twitter understands us better than we understand ourselves. And like I think that it enables us to kind of like tap into those tendencies and share people who say negative, like to share to virtue signal, to share someone who called out Justine, whatever her name is, for that
Exactly. Yeah.
joke. Like I'm going to share it, and then he's going to share it, and then we're going to share this, and it like makes. I just think that there's like a lot going on, and I think that there's like a deep misunderstanding, and I actually think that like at least from what I've heard and what I understood before about the intellectual dark web, I just think it's kind of misguided. I think a lot of the purpose is misguided. I think it's based off of a large misunderstanding of like gated institution
Institutions.
narrative. Like I just don't, I don't actually see that. Like there are professors who get tenured and say extreme things on the right too. Like again, the notion that like colleges are primarily liberal, like that is true generally, but like not as much as people really think. There are a lot of professors and political scientists who are quite conservative or moderate. Neoliberalism is like a very severe, if we want to talk about what's exuded in academic culture, like I think neoliberalism is that. I don't think it's far left progressivism by any means.
Yeah,
I
well,
agree.
yeah. Oh, go ahead, Evan.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think what you're driving at is the availability bias, which I think is what is behind so much of this. So availability bias is the easier it is to think of an example of something, the more common you think that thing is. So if you watch the news every night and you hear about someone being murdered, say a couple times a week or something like that, you're going to end up thinking, if someone then asks you, how high do you think the murder rate is? How many people out of every 100,000, say, are murdered each year? Your estimate is going to be much higher than someone that doesn't watch the news as regularly as you, because you are exposed to so many different examples of murder that happen. This is something that's been studied quite a bit through research. There's actually a really clever study that I think was either conducted by Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, or co-wrote. I think there was another author. He either did this study or just wrote about it in the book. But if you ask people, what do you think are the chances of an earthquake happening? I don't know. It was like in the next year, or a catastrophic earthquake happening anywhere, something like that. And people gave a certain estimate. But if the question was, what do you think of a catastrophic earthquake happening in California in the next year, which by definition is going to be less likely than a catastrophic earthquake happening in a broader geographic area. But people will say it is much more likely, if you mention California. So it's that sort of, the easier it is to think of an example, the more common you think it is. And I think this is, especially in the age of the internet and stuff, it's so easy to basically construct a narrative like this. And I think this is what's behind so much anti-SJW stuff. It's like, you find a video, or create a video of some progressive protests on college campus, and you can find the dumbest person in the crowd there. You can post a video, it can get shared around like crazy, and people will, you do that a handful of times, people will get this idea of what your college or university is like, that it's swarmed with SJWs. And I think that's pretty much what has happened around the country is, and I'm not saying that there isn't an element of that extreme, irrational SJW stuff, but it's so much less common than people think it is. And it's not something that really generally affects people in their everyday life. I've seen it actually on college campuses, especially in the last year when I got my master's degree. I saw, a lot of SJW type activity, if you can call it that. So I mean, it's there, but it's not this mob that's carrying around pitchforks. But if you look on the right, you do see a literal mob carrying pitchforks. If you look in Charlottesville, I think
That's
this is
true.
the sentiment that's driving the IDW, is this perceived need for a large orchestrated backlash against SJWs, and I feel like it's just born out of a misconception of how large the problem is.
And I want to say that just real quick, Mike, and I'll let you go, but just to say, like, and I don't think you're implying this either, Evan, or at least for me, I'm not trying to undercut the notion that there is some type of extremist leftist culture, ideology, whatever we want to call it, somewhere. Like, I believe that there is. I just don't, I don't think it's of the magnitude that might be conceived of. Like when people go on these tirades and stuff, like it definitely exists. And I think that this issue of extreme leftism, if that's what we want to call it, is linked with a broader idea of like social equity. And I think that broader issue of social equity kind of confuses things too. Like when we say we want to see LGBTQIA plus individuals represented in the media, or non-white individuals represented in the media, there's a social equity purpose there that gets conflated with the kind of extremist leftism, um, even though they are really, really different. I just want to add that caveat because I think it's real. I just don't think it's as real as people make it out to be. And at the same time, the realness does matter. We can disavow the leftists, but you know, um, I am
Yeah,
someone who is cautious about certain ideas. And I'm happy to elaborate, but I
yeah,
think
yeah. Let me jump in because I
because
just
yeah, no, I don't
I have,
want. I know you don't want that to go there.
yeah, I just have an extra. I have a lot to respond to. So I guess I'm gonna be the standard bearer for the IDW. Although, yeah, and I have my criticisms along some of these lines too. But I brought up this metaphor of the left carrying a big stick, or yeah, the left carrying a big stick,
I
but
got a
not
little
always
stick.
needing to use it. And these incidences of the left carrying the big stick and using it are the flashpoints that have largely fueled the IDW. So things like Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying's firing at Evergreen State. You had the assault of that professor that was chaperoning Charles Murray, and Charles Murray's not speaking at Middlebury College.
I did not know about that. I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah,
about the assault. I knew about the incident at Middlebury. I did not know someone was assaulted.
yeah.
People get people do
Yeah,
not like Charles Murray.
yeah. That woman was an opponent of Charles Murray that wanted to debate him too. So it was really
That's
a left.
ironic.
Yeah, and cars were destroyed. It was terrible. So these things are fueling this narrative that the left is authoritarian. You'll hear that phrase a lot, and they're just generally a horrible mob. But as you point out, that doesn't get us particularly far because there are all kinds of controversial and difficult conversations happening on college campuses and elsewhere. But I think Jonathan Haidt brings in the deeper concern that stems from that, which is that most of the time the stick is just there, but it doesn't have to be used. The first time someone in a classroom raises a controversial idea and is shouted down by a professor, this sort of thing happened to me in my own college career and undergraduate work. That chills everyone else's um, perception of how freely they can speak or what opinions are acceptable to hold. So the real cost of this is not the Charles Murray's or the Brett Weinstein's. The real cost is in intellectual diversity. And I don't have numbers in front of me or anything, but there's a reason Jonathan Haidt started the Heterodox Academy, Heterodox Institute, and it is really worrying about this idea that most college professors are somewhere between center left to very left. How many genuine Trump supporters are there in any sense? How many of them can say two nice things about him?
But what really does that mean, center left? Like this is kind of what I mean. Like
But
I
I
actually
mean,
don't think that
from
there's some ideological indoctrination happening at colleges. I don't think you're suggesting that, but
I'm
like
not suggesting that, but I'm saying how much genuine diversity is there? Do they either want to be? This is a Bhaskar Sunkara concept that was brought up in the Michael Brooks episode. Bhaskar Sunkara is a socialist founder of Jacobin. He was saying most people look around the world. Do the model the right wants is Hungary, kind of authoritarian, almost ethno-nationalist. Then the neoliberals want Singapore, and then the social democrats, the social democratic socialists want Finland, right? Robust social safety nets, and that sort of thing. Most people, on college campuses are from somewhere between Singapore and Finland. Not saying they should be Hungary. I think that framing is pretty unflattering to the right, but they either want, generally free trade, generally social democrat, maybe of the Clinton mode, or they're further left, and they fall into identity politics categories or things like that.
So just to that point though, real quick, because again, like center left, what does that mean? Like I actually think that like it's a very like empty term in a way, or maybe a better way of putting it, it's very capacious. Like I think center left means neoconservative, I actually think.
Really?
Yeah, no, I think that there's like a lot happening in the moderate center. I think that like conservatism as a concept is like dwindling and going away, and people don't really care about social conservatives care about social conservatives, but people generally have socially liberal beliefs. People generally have neoliberal economic beliefs. Like people generally have these beliefs. I don't think it's because of like some cordoning off of ideology. I just think it's because people are collectively realizing that like if let's just say this whole thing is the spectrum a little bit, like as you get to the right, or I guess it's my left or your left people, but whatever, the further to the right it goes, I think people generally agree that these are things that people that don't that aren't necessarily based on the same kind of quantitative and qualitative information that other types of political ideologies are based upon. It's very faith-based, very intuitional. I think professors are neoliberal and neoconservative and center left. I just don't think like I just don't think that there's like this heterodoxy. Like that. It's actually a good word that Jonathan Haidt is used. I just don't think it
Well,
characterizes the nature of college campuses. I mean, I
well,
don't know. I don't have
no,
data either.
well, he's saying the problem is that it's not heterodox enough. The problem is
Or
that
no,
there's
yeah,
a consensus. Um, there isn't a lot of genuine political disagreement.
that's what I mean. I don't think that that's true. I don't know that to be the case, but I don't think that that's true. I think it's just if you really polled every professor in the United States, like I don't think you would have a finding that says like most of these people are liberal.
You don't.
No, I don't think
I mean,
that.
that polling data is not hard to find, and it is there. I mean, it's pretty. I think it's pretty obvious that the left has won the culture war. The left has won the university war. The left has won the Hollywood war. That these culture war issues and framings are not ridiculous. After following the 1960s, I think that the left concentrated a lot of its energy in things like creativity, and there's a lot of very liberal people in the arts and in the Hollywood machine, and there's a lot of very liberal people in academic institutions. A lot of like, hippies and children of hippies.
But the thing is that
Uh,
this gets conflated,
well,
like progressivism gets conflated with communism. You know,
well, no, I'm not. I'm saying being
I know
of
you're not like this is, and let me just say now, because this is kind of what I was saying earlier. Like I get dubious about certain concepts because I want to make sure that like we're implying the right thing. And I know you're not trying to say that, but I just don't want people walking away thinking that like it's okay or like that there's some room to conflate communism and extreme leftism,
but I don't think there's real
with
danger of that.
liberalism.
I don't think there's real danger
I
in that.
do.
And I just, I
I think that
don't.
that's exactly why the intellectual dark web exists, because there's this
No, the
misconception.
intellectual dark web has
Well, if
nothing to do with red baiting or
speculating.
respectfully here, Scout. You say you know nothing about the IDW, and now you're making this charge that it's like a red baiting anti-commie organization. Now there is some of that in Jordan Peterson, but I'm not really there.
And Ben
And
Shapiro, if Ben Shapiro is what we would
yeah,
consider a part of the IDW.
yeah, I don't know if he's a card carrying member, but it's not hard to find. I mean, I haven't looked at this data, but I think we'll table the issue for now. But I think
Yeah.
there's pretty hard data to suggest that there's not as much intellectual diversity as we might like within higher education.
Yeah, I agree. If I could jump in, I think I've seen some data on that, and it's definitely true. There is some diversity, I think, across subjects. Like, you know, economics professors are more likely to be right wing,
Yes.
but you look at you know, social psychology, sociology professors, um, we're overwhelmingly on the left. But I also don't think that's
Overwhelmingly.
yes. I also don't. I think the ratio might be like 100 to 1 or something like that. It's very high. I also don't think that's surprising. I think, Mike, you kind of implied, I think, that it's been a sort of concerted effort on the left to put these people in, you know, academia and Hollywood and other places like that.
Well, no, yeah, I think it's a natural. I think I did imply that, but
I think
I
it's
would say it's
natural,
more of a
yeah.
filtering
I
process.
mean, if you look at who values higher education, I haven't seen any polling data on this, but it would not surprise me at all if you know, it's people on the left that value um, higher education more than people on the right, whereas the right might be more interested in, you know, trade schools and things like that,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So I would I would push back against the idea that it's any kind of concerted effort. I would
No, that
say
sounds
we should
considered.
expect this sort of imbalance in certain subjects in academia. And that's not to say that more intellectual or ideological diversity wouldn't be a good thing. I think it would be a good thing. Um, but again, I just don't think it's surprising that we have this bias.
Yeah, I think that there are certain personality profiles that go into different fields. I think that economics people, the people that sort of like that, probably have the sort of brains that are more inclined to be right wing. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that was the kind of the way things just naturally filtered out.
I
But
guess that's like what I was trying,
yeah,
what I was maybe not articulating well earlier when I was talking about like how if you like put things on a spectrum, I just think naturally based upon discipline, information, history, knowledge, whatever we want to call it, what goes into being a professor, an academic, people are just naturally landing on spots on the spectrum. Like I don't think it's we just did this, so I'm not going to repeat it again. But Evan, you basically articulated what I was trying to articulate, and I think that like it's important to take away and to like
but
not be fearful of academia and think that it's some
no, I'm
monolith.
not suggesting we should be fearful, but I'm suggesting that alternate views should get oxygen and a fair hearing. The
Fair. I mean,
only
that's what we're
way,
about here.
yeah, the only way to arrive at a better idea of how society should be run is to have this war of ideas, is to give oxygen to different viewpoints, and then the ones that are the most absurd will starve from lack of oxygen. And I think that we chill speech and we create an environment where challenging viewpoints are considered upsetting or dangerous, and that they don't deserve their fair hearing because they're fascism in disguise or something like this.
I agree with that. And I think one place where um, I think that happens a lot is the peer review process in like scientific journals and stuff. It's a very clear, I mean, the purpose really, I think, is a sort of gatekeeping, whether you think it's legitimate or not. I think it is generally probably legitimate, you know, a good thing that we have peer review processes, but I think it is a way for certain ideas that people might not like to kind of remain sort of hidden and not enter the published literature. Um, and that can get into, you know, all sorts of other problems. Um, you know, like in psychology, the uh, replication crisis and things like that. There are certain people doing work in this space to, um, I don't know, I guess increase the exposure to, you know, different ideas that haven't really seen the light very much, and exposing the fact that there's been I think historically, definitely a left-wing bias in the published literature and things like that. So I see the merits there, but um, I think maybe we could discuss whether the IDW is really an alternative to that. Like, are they really um, a mechanism for getting these ideas out there that wouldn't otherwise get out there in some way, shape, or form? Are they having the same impact? Because scientific journals are one thing, but podcasts and things like that are another. I don't know that that can really replace, the academia as an institution.
It's true, but your responsibility as a public intellectual, and most of these people are fit that bill, are public intellectuals or in academia to some limited extent, or maybe to a major extent. But mostly they're going to lead by example, and so they're going to show that there's someone prominent who has a voice, who can express these things. My concern partly is the IDW doesn't stand for an enormous amount, and so the ideas that are controversial sometimes a lot of times are pretty basic, and they're not saying that much. They'll say something like biology is real, and there are the biological differences of men and women influence them. Now, there are corners of Twitter and the left where that sort of thing is hard to say, and maybe it does take genuine bravery to say that. But at the same time, I think there's often the supposition that like the entire world has gone mad, and you can't say that really in any respectable place. Or they'll say something like the world is not made of villains and heroes, which is, I think, true. Although, there are certainly increasingly quarters of our culture where it is your worldview is binary. It's the bad globalists or the bad world leaders. There's people who are bad and there's people who are good, and that's the kind of totalizing worldview that's become popular. So they're saying something, but they're also not articulating a full vision of how the world should operate in any sense. I'll let you guys react on that.
Just to say, I heard Sam Harris give an hour and a half long lecture about human flourishing and not define it one time.
I think that's kind of you. So like, if I had a discussion about, he compared this to health. If I had a discussion about like health and how like eating fruits and vegetables or something is good for you, I wouldn't really have to go. The term health is kind of ill-defined. We know sort of what it goes along with. We know that being healthy is being able to move freely, to be able to maybe run or but I think that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, it's the only thing I can say about this
Yeah.
part of the conversation.
I think what I don't know how much this relates to what you were saying, Mike, but I've been entertained by Slavoj Žižek from time to time.
Yeah, same.
I think he's just like funny mostly.
Mm-hmm.
He says, when you think you're outside of ideology, that's exactly when you're consumed by it.
Yes.
When it's controlling you the most or something like that. I feel like the IDW is an attempt to say things or talk about quote unquote ideas in a context-free space. But really what they're doing, I think, is trying to talk without ideology. I think, and I think that's probably impossible in some way. I think what they're trying to do is decouple things, and the idea of coupling, I think, is where you have two ideas or two statements or whatever that are very closely connected, where one kind of logically flows from another. Or a lot of people think one will logically flow from another. So you say one thing like biology is real, and the thing that might come out of your mouth next is that transgender people are mentally ill or something like that. And
Yes.
what happens is when you say one thing like biology is real, people hear the next thing, or they insert a sentence for you. They fill in the blanks basically. I think a lot of times it is perfectly fair to do that, especially given the context in which someone is saying it. So if someone like Ben Shapiro says biology is real, I can be pretty sure that the next thing he's going to say is that, no one is actually transgender, or, no one is born in the wrong body, or whatever, however you want to put it.
He might
Because
mean that, yeah. And
I know that he does think that, because he
exactly.
has said it.
Yeah.
But then he can say that first part that no one on its own, no one can really disagree with. But that's all he has to say in order for his fans and everyone else to fill in the blanks. But then when the argument starts, all he has to do is say, I really just said biology is real. Now the left is disagreeing with me on that. Who's the party of science or whatever. I think the IDW is a way to try to talk about these ideas in a vacuum. And I don't think it really works, because what ends up happening is people hear things that you may or may not be saying, but also it makes them become pretty vague. I don't know if that's totally coherent, but that's just what I was thinking.
Well, don't we want to decouple things though? Don't we want to make it so that if you say you can use that in a slimy, dishonest way, like in the Ben Shapiro way of saying, like moving the goalposts of saying what you were actually saying. Like, really, I was just saying biology is real, but you were sort of subtly implying that say transgenderism isn't shouldn't be a thing at all. But we do want to it's hard because there's gradations of propaganda, but we do want to be able to take claims seriously. And the claim that biology is real is okay. We don't want to throw out that baby with the bathwater of some odious thing that you think it means. Sometimes things are the truth, or the truth might be adjacent to something you don't like. And I think people will often throw out both with them. The example Eric Weinstein always gives is like immigration. Like, most people occupy this middle ground where they're xenophilic restrictionists, meaning they don't want open borders. They want to know who's in the country, but they love Mexican food, they love Indian food. They're not xenophobic against people from different cultures, but there are economic reasons why we might want to restrict who enters the country. But it's either like, you're a racist Republican or you're an open borders liberal. We totalize in either direction.
I think part of the problem is that the right wing is really good at latching onto to the decoupling, and I think it seems like there's a more the right wing, I think, is less squeamish about associating with people who disagree with them a lot. I think that they turn to people who will say some things they like, even if they're only saying half of the whole thing. And I think in some way what ends up happening is that the first part implies the second part, partly because of who is listening, who the audience is. And I think that it can end up, I think that it ends up appealing, the decoupling, I think, ends up appealing more to the right wing than the left wing, because they're filling in the blanks. I
Yeah,
don't know.
that's a
I'm
genuinely
getting
hard
lost.
fight.
Yeah.
No, I'm totally, I'm with you that this is what's the term dog whistling. I think, Scout, you may have introduced this to me, or at least said it more often than anyone else I know. The idea of just like, you say, or saying the quiet part out loud would be the reverse of dog whistling. Oops, you're supposed to say just this little thing, and that signals this whole other ideology connected to it. And so it's like this wink, wink, but we have plausible
Yeah.
deniability at the same time.
And I think a lot of times, sorry, but you
Yeah,
just
go
reminded
ahead.
me. I think a lot of times these people are blowing the dog whistle without realizing it.
Those are the
It's not
kinds of things
intended
that
to
I
be
get.
a dog whistle, but in effect it is, and it brings the right wing there. And I think it, Dave Rubin, I think, is probably really the most egregious example of this. He sort of LARPs as a liberal or whatever, but he's just sitting there nodding along with his alt-right guest after alt-right
Stefan
guest.
Molyneux, yeah, all these
Yes.
crazies.
And it's so egregious. And he'll talk about, the extreme left, can't talk about these ideas. But then, he'll be sitting there with, someone like Ben Shapiro saying, I don't agree with your lifestyle because Dave Rubin is gay. I would not come to your wedding, things like that. I think it was Ben Shapiro. Maybe it was someone else.
It was Ben
But
Shapiro. Yeah, I
yeah,
remember
but
that.
he's just nodding along, completely debasing himself. And I think the right wing loves to see that, even if he's nominally on a liberal or whatever. At the end of the day, if all you're blowing are dog whistles, all you're going to get is the right wing.
Yeah, and this is part of the problem with them. I'll let you go, Scout.
Just
Go
to
ahead.
say quickly, I think that
Yeah.
this is my concern with these things. I don't want to appear emotional, but like I get concerned about like breathing oxygen into ideologies that feed into violence. I think that it's like a complicated pipeline, but I think it's something that I'm hyper conscious about, and I don't always know how to navigate that issue. But I do think it's a present in my mind. Or it's present in my mind when I hear these conversations and think about these figures.
Well, so this is part of the problem with a viewpoint that doesn't, that is completely anti-cancel anyone, that is like open-armed war of ideas. I think that could work in theory, but there's no one policing its borders. It's not like Barry Weiss is gathering everyone up and questioning them for their beliefs and taking applications on this thing. So it's really kind of a loose collection of figures. And I have limited respect for Jordan Peterson, although I think he has some interesting ideas, and I think he's a great speaker, actually. But I don't, he doesn't hold a lot of water with me. I don't like Ben Shapiro at all. I don't like Dave Rubin at all. I think those people get very little respect, actually. I don't think, with someone I like Sam, I don't really see a lot of like, justifications of violence or anything like that. But this is not a movement that.
Well, I think
Go ahead.
it's there's a separate issue too with people like Sam. I just think that like I again, like only being on the periphery and hearing kind of how you describe him or hearing how he gets described by others on when I watch things on YouTube, it's like I just feel like there's like a lot. It's like everyone gets caught up in the conversation, and I just feel like it's like it just feels like a lot of like a hobby for a lot of people. Like it's just like a fun hobby to like be deep. But like I don't think like I think it's like more for like the thrill of it than actually being like I'm someone who is very serious about ideas, and like I'm someone who I'm flippant when I say I listen to the Blaze TV for fun. I am genuinely concerned. Like I'm interested in learning things that I disagree with. Like I think So but at the same time, because these ideas are very serious, I don't think that they're serious for them. I just think it's about like being deep and then like not going anywhere with it. Kind of not to denigrate him as being clickbaity, but like it's kind of like wanting to be the smart guy and then like just that's about it. Like I feel like that's what as shallow as the interests are.
Give an example of why you feel that way.
Sam Harris talked for an hour and a half about human flourishing and about how that should be a goal of governments. And he didn't once describe human flourishing. I understand that maybe it's an intuitional thing, but like I don't, as someone whose background is in public policy and who wants to be able to define
But that was not a political
abstract,
argument. That was a
he was
philosophical book. But it was not.
he was talking about how the public interest and how governments should support the public interest and on maximizing human flourishing.
1 second. Are you okay, Renee?
So like that's
I'm in a
the thing for me.
live. Okay. Yeah, I know we're live. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, we may have to cut this.
Well, it can. It's too late.
I can respond. Yeah, I know what you're getting at. I think his defense of people saying, "Oh, you're not defining it," is that he's saying it's the opposite of the worst possible misery for everyone. He's like, so we can talk about things that are good, things that are bad, but we have these, the fact that we know that something is good versus bad means that we're getting closer to that, whatever we might call human flourishing. So it might be like the number infinity, like you can count all you want, you'll never reach it, but we know what will get us closer to that. We have an idea of things that are good versus bad, and more good things is leading us towards human flourishing. So, but I get what you're getting at, which is like he talks in very abstract terms. And it does seem like a hobby, and that's the biggest reason I think that I don't really listen to him much anymore, because I mean, even he describes it as thinking out loud, and that just sounds so boring to me. And at the end of the day, I think I did end up getting pretty bored. Like, it's just a hobby, and at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of times they have no skin in the game. They're not telling you, donate money to this cause. From what I've seen, I've been out of the loop for a little while on this because I just got kind of bored with it. They don't really have much skin in the game. They don't really make changes in their own life. It's like, again, it's just in a vacuum. And it seems like nothing really comes of it. It's like they're building amusement parks and Roller Coaster Tycoon and saying, this is how we're going to end up building the best Six Flags the world's ever seen. And it's like, no, you're playing a computer game. I don't know. Maybe that's too harsh.
I mean,
I think it's funny.
I'll give you an example of putting something into practice. After Sam Harris had Will McCaskill, he's one of the founders of Effective Altruism, along with Peter Singer, on the podcast. They were talking about what would be, if you were to average out, go put your money in the most effective possible charity for saving a life, about how much money would it cost to save a human life? And Will said it was about $3,500 based on their best estimates, based on giving out that many dollars worth of bed nets in malaria and their effectiveness rate and everything. So the money Sam Harris gets every month, the first 3,500 of it goes directly to bed nets. And that's something he's worried about. Again, it's not like
that's great. I actually remembered that. I totally forgot about that. So that is an example where I was wrong. But yeah, I think they do actually champion effective altruism in a way. But I think, I don't know, maybe it's just the discussions of like factory farming and stuff that they've had. I remember there was a discussion, I think, between Sam Harris and
Paul Bloom,
Brett Weinstein.
Paul
Bloom was one where they both basically agreed that animal farming is the most horrible thing ever, and it should come to an end, and things like that. And then sometime later, Sam had a discussion with, I think, Brett Weinstein, and there was an audience question about veganism or something. And Sam said something about, if we could have perfect conditions for raising livestock and then slaughtering them as quickly as possible, they're as happy as they can possibly be, and all this stuff. He's like, I don't really have a problem. I wouldn't have a problem with it. And I'm sort of like, okay, I mean, that's fine. Like, without discussing the issue of, killing something that doesn't want to die. We don't live in a world like that.
So what's even the point?
Yeah, what's even the point of bringing that up? Because I think actually it was in response to a question about Sam's attempt to go vegan, which he has not done. And he brings up these abstract things about, in an ideal world, and this is something that meat eaters do all the time, and it's endlessly frustrating because we don't live in that ideal world. Maybe if we did, you could go back to, justifying eating meat and animal products and stuff like that, but it's not the world we live in. So, some fantasy does not justify what you're doing in reality. And it's that kind of thing that's like, yeah, it's just a hobby. You don't actually have any skin in the game. You're just looking for excuses. And maybe I'm being too harsh, but it's
Well, if you're being too harsh, I'm going to be presumptuous and point out something that I know he's argued about is his views on Islam. I think he's not sensitive to the threat of Islamic Americans and people who are Islamic. I don't think he's sensitive to the threat that people are vulnerable to at practicing their faith openly. I think he's overly general in describing how the faith translates into the lives of people. And if he's going to have arguments about governments, theocracies, where there are bad examples of Islam gone awry, I think that those are political arguments that ought to be hedged against the religiosity. And I think that that's something that I've often felt he's not taking seriously. If he's seriously concerned about the well-being of Muslims and Islamic people of faith, which I don't know anything about his beliefs aside from what you say or what I read about, because I have read an article about him characterizing Islam. I just think like that's an example of like just opining and then like not really seeing like how it plays out in real life. I think that that's like a crucial thing.
Yeah, I don't really want to go down this road with you because I think we want to talk about the IDW generally, and you're not bringing enough to the table. I mean, bring me a quote, read his book, Islam and the Future of Tolerance. Tell me about why his relationship with Majid Nawaz is and his organization is wrongheaded. Tell me how he hasn't worried. He's downplayed the threat of Islamophobia in contemporary lives and in terms of numbers. There, I think that's the common knock. But I don't see you bringing the evidence to suggest that that's really a real concern. I obviously disagree.
I shouldn't be here anyway because I don't know anything about the intellectual dark web. I'm only here talking about discourse from Discord and just jumping in where I can. No, I can't cite anything substantively about what he's argued.
I think that's flippant.
Well, I mean, I think that there's a larger question of people questioning Islam that I'm very concerned by, and that's why I bring that up in particular.
I think he is generally pretty careful about talking about Islam as a religion and not Muslims as people. I certainly would give him a pass on, I don't think if anyone is listening to what he says and then, goes out and beats up Muslims or anything like that, that's on them. I don't think he can be held responsible for that.
And it's exactly the center of the bullseye.
That's not what I'm trying to say, though.
It's the center of the bullseye with what we're talking about. The idea, criticism of Islam as a doctrine is conflated with bigotry against Muslims as people. That was one of his lines in the big Ben Affleck thing. And I feel like that's what's happened to him. That's the sort of the way in which Islam figures into these issues is taboo, is completely off topic. And if you do bring that in, you are pushing Islamophobia, supporting Islamophobia.
I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying that if how I've interpreted what you've described him saying is correct and accurate from what I've heard secondarily or even, tertiarily, I always have concerns. I think that there's insufficient context given to the discussion of Islam in the world today about the real governmental pieces that enable those extremist elements. So that's really my point. And again, purely speculating. So I just want to make sure I'm drawing out my qualification here, which is zilch.
But the point of a lot of this stuff is discussing difficult ideas, and because a difficult idea like the one that Sam, Sam's framing of Islam is very difficult and very challenging, and that is adjacent to bigotry in people's minds. It's right next door in most people's minds, and so therefore we get emotionally hijacked. That's really the center of the bullseye. But I do want to leave it there because I understand your concern. I think
Yeah.
that I want to end with this topic of,
Yeah, we're like 52 minutes in.
Yeah. Do you mind if one more topic and I just?
Oh, that's fine. I mean, if we get
Okay.
an hour, that's
Yeah.
a round number.
All right. So the concern that a lot of people on the left have with the IDW is, maybe I can even find a quote. Here's a quote from Michael Brooks about, about the movement generally. They all defend capitalistic economic order domestically and American imperial hegemony globally. So the idea is just that these are people who are justifying the status quo in some way. And there's two competing things in my mind. There's outrage at the unfairness of the world and the system. And then there is the difficulty of achieving a good world. How many unintended consequences, how many good intentions pave the road to hell. And so you balance these two things. And I think the progressive left in particular is all about like rage at the system, and it leads to a kind of like burn it down, start afresh, and the more extreme corners of it type of approach. And I think a lot of the IDW is more of like, gee, look at how really hard it is to do things the right way. Look at how so many times our best intentions fail us, and how the world is just so multifarious and complicated that it's not about rage at bad people. It's about the complexity of the world and the way in which suffering, it's so hard to alleviate the suffering and the problems of the world.
Yeah, although that is interesting. Well, aren't both the Weinsteins Bernie supporters, or is it just one of them?
Eric was in 2016 and said he could not support Bernie in 2020. Wasn't entirely clear why by tweet. Eric, I'm not sure about. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical that he was, but I'm not sure.
Okay. I don't know. I feel like I'm having trouble figuring out what you were saying before.
Well, there's two things. There's two things that you have to balance in your mind. There's your anger at the unfair, and you should have both of these. Being angry at the system and its injustices, and the pragmatics of how to get to a better world. And those two things, you can only be angry if you think that like bad people are doing bad things intentionally. That's part of what drives a lot of anger. And then I think what tempers a lot of anger on the other end of the spectrum is the way in which there's an ideology I think Sam has that most Americans have, that generally our politicians, our establishments are generally good people trying to do the right thing. And it's just that we're screwing up and we're failing in so many myriad, very human ways.
So where does the IDW fall in that? Because this is something that Robert Wright wrote, or someone else.
Oh no,
wrote?
this is something that Michael Brooks wrote. Michael
Okay.
Brooks wrote in the
And this is a criticism of IDW.
That they're continuing American imperialism, right? Sam's anti-Islam comments are falling into the Bush, the Bush years and the war. Although that's kind of old hat, but that they're they're not supporting the slate of progressive policies because they favor the world as it is, more as it is. Do you guys see that charge in them, that there's too much of an establishmentarian streak, which is ironic because they're not, they're all against the establishment in terms of it being suppressive of ideas, but they're not down with the revolution, is the quote, the way the left often sees it.
Yeah, so it is interesting to go back to the idea of the IDW being a way around the gatekeeping. This kind of strikes me as another form of gatekeeping, where it's like, let's spend hours on going on each other's podcasts talking about how messed up things are, but at the end of the day, those people trying to change it, we don't totally agree with them. We're going to fall short of endorsing what they're doing. Again, it aligns very well with what I was saying about it coming across as like a hobby.
Yeah. I suppose we should leave it there, I would say.
Yeah, I
What do you
will
guys
say,
think?
like, I have definitely enjoyed listening to a lot of people within the IDW. I used to listen to Dave Rubin, unfortunately. I've listened to Ben Shapiro,
Unfortunately.
don't like him. Jordan Peterson, I've listened to a lot of him. I think he's okay. And Sam Harris used to be like my favorite thinker of all time, if you could call him that. And the Weinsteins are just like their own thing.
Yeah, they're more of a new thing. You know what we
But I
should
just got bored. I just got bored with it for reasons that I think I've laid out here.
Yeah. I've fallen a little bit by the wayside with Sam. He's having a lot of like off the cuff conversations now that I'm not finding as intriguing. You know what? Maybe we should end on briefly is just the sense of what are we doing here that's different from them? How can we maybe learn from their mistakes?
Yeah, that was
Or
really what my whole purpose for being here was. It's
yes,
unfortunate that it's like at the end of the conversation that we like go into this, but I just want to say, like, to the point about like what I heard kind of was like hand wringing, like just being angry at whatever, and then like not really having a coherent discussion. I don't really like abstraction. I think that like I'm someone who doesn't appreciate speaking in abstractions or thinking about things purely in abstract terms. Um, like we so like when I talk about, or when I think about like how the government's failed and like what we can do or what needs to be done to make it better, like I prefer not to just think about like abstract things like the government should simply do X. Like I want to try to define that like in practicable terms that can be translated into real life. That doesn't really fit into what we've just been speaking about, but like that comes out when we have discussions with diverse ideological groups. And like I think, Mike, this was an area where um, this is probably the biggest area of disagreement between you and I think.
yes,
Partly because of a large gap of ignorance on my part, but I think that if what I understand about the intellectual dark web is accurate, and I don't really make any bets on that, I just think that like it's different from us here at Discourse and Discord, because eventually people will start to see that like we intend on being very serious about like hearing out the full case of someone generally. Like we're not going to have conspiracy theorists on the show. Well,
we just
maybe,
discussed possibly. But
maybe.
you know what? There are points of genuine disagreement with, to the extent that they can make an argument and stay within the bounds of
Yeah,
good
that's really the
argumentation.
point. So like we're not
Then
really
yeah,
about ideology in the same way that maybe the intellectual dark web tries to ascribe to itself that it's not concerned about ideology and it's about decoupling. We This is an emotional subject for me. So I came
yeah.
off a different way because I'm very concerned about my progressive biases. I want to make sure that like people don't walk away from certain conversations thinking bad things. But in Discourse from Discord, we really are about like bringing voices together and having the full discussion about tough conversations and ideologies that we don't agree with. We've exhibited that somewhat here, and in future episodes, it'll start to come out
Yeah, and
more
one thing
clearly.
I'll say about the IDW that's a fair criticism is that it's it's kind of a club where they go on each other's podcasts, and I don't see Sam engaging with a lot of people who are on the progressive left or having a vegan on or something like that.
Yeah.
Where is that? You know, it's supposed to be about real engagement of ideas. That's something, we're discourse from discord. There needs to be discord at the start that we can turn into discourse. Yeah, to turn into discourse.
That's the point. Yeah.
So we need to actually live up to that and actually have diverse people.
And let's not be abstract about this, right? Like I just said, I hate abstraction. What I'm really thinking about here is like getting like we know people who are libertarians. We know people who are very far, you know, extreme libertarians who believe in like going back to the gold standard, the Mises Institute types. You know, we know people who are anti-disestablishmentarianism. I know a few people who are on the democratic socialist side of. We want to start to bring different ideologies, and it's not just about political discussions either. We will bring back the ethos of spread your mind that existed on a small Facebook group. You know, where we had all types of conversations, and it's really necessary. And we've been on the tirade, and I wish I had more time for the tirade because but you know, it's really the point here.
Yeah, it was a fairy tale time from our youth, and we had a similar kind of discussion group.
But not just for the fun of it. You know, my concern about people walking away with ideas and misinterpreting them and doing bad things is born out of an idea, or really born out of a fact that people don't seem to do well with different opinions. You know, we really hope to change that. Like I encourage people I disagree with to talk to me about things, because it helps me strengthen my positions, or maybe change someone else's positions, or whatever the case may be. It just, you know, we really plan on living out that like free market of ideas BS that gets talked about, that doesn't really get seen in society a lot.
It's BS that we want to live up to.
Yeah, that's really the point.
All right.
I don't know, Evan, if you have anything you want to share
any
about
final
that.
thoughts?
You're not really like a discourse from Discord fellow or something, but
No,
door's
but
always open.
the idea of you know, not just talking for the fun of it, I think is good. I don't know actually what that looks like, because we're on a platform of a podcast, you know, where you're talking, and yeah, I don't know. I think you might have to be creative to figure out how to, you know, put your money where your mouth is, quite literally.
Noted.
Yeah.
And
well,
that
you'll
also
see.
goes for us at The Reason Vegan. If we you know, ever get enough Patreon subscribers or something, we'll have to think about causes and things that we can donate that might not be, you know, strictly vegan or whatever, something like that.
Certainly.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's a good place to end it, and we're like a little over an hour, so yeah, not too bad. Not too bad.
All right,
All right.
good.
Have
Cool.
a good part of your day wherever you are, person.